Okay, welcome to this podcast. So I've got the pleasure of connecting with and talking to Christian De La Huerta, and hopefully I've said your name right. Is it Huerta or Huerta, Christian? I know the H.
Huerta.
Huerta. It's a Spanish version, is it? Basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That always catches the Brits out because it's
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
silent H, isn't it? Which is a W in your kind of version, really.
Yeah. Exactly. WERTA. That's what it sounds like phonetically.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, welcome to the podcast. Obviously, Christian, basically, I was going to find you on Podmatch, and I think your bio was so interesting because you're a transformational coach, award-winning author, TEDx speaker, which not everyone can say they've been on the TEDx stage effectively, and also with over 30 years' experience of guiding individuals, couples, and people trying to fulfill relationships. And I think when I looked at your bio, Christian, what kind of I picked up was basically trying to make people happy, which these days I think everyone kind of needs to be in that space. And since we've been through this difficult journey for the last 4 or 5 years with different things happening over the world, people like yourself now I think are instrumental in taking people's hand, almost like a kind of paramedic would really, and trying to kind of nurture and guide them back to a place that they can find themselves, be happy, and just kind of let go of anxiety, negative energy, negative feelings, emotions. And I know we obviously deal with lots of clients every day, and so many people fall into that bracket, and we always struggle to find someone like yourself actually to signpost them to. So I thought this would be a really interesting conversation with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm really, really happy to be on the podcast with you. Um, and yeah, that is what drives me. Helping people to find who they are, to come to a place of deep self acceptance, self love, a sense of fulfillment, lives that have meaning and purpose, relationships that actually have a chance of working. That's what my work is about. And what drives it too is like paraphrasing Einstein, who said you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So when I look at the world that we're in, and like you're talking about all the incredible challenges that we're facing, and I think the only way that we can dig ourselves out of this hole that we have dug ourselves into collectively is nothing less than a leap in consciousness, something that's going to shift the way that we see ourselves, the way we see each other, the way that we see the planet. We can't do it, we can't throw stuff at it the same way that we've been doing it before. It's got to be something radically different.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it. I think there's so many people now in this field, in this sector. We all do different things. We all have different modalities, I guess, and ways to do things. But ultimately, we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to take someone that's in a traumatic state, in a state of fear, really, generally, and find ways to kind of open that shell, kind of take them by the hand, lead them out, and then find ways to clear their field. And there's different modalities that do different things, but I think everything kind of works together really. So, and of course these sorts of modalities, there are so many of them now out there on the internet. There's so many people doing these things. I think it makes it interesting because there's different ways to do things. But I think ultimately, for me really, we're trying to stay authentic in this time of AI and tech and computing, going back to the real way of doing things, person to person, which is why I like your approach. It's kind of hands-on with someone, actually talking to a real person, rather than watching a video or doing some sort of other kind of modality that isn't kind of integrative. Is that your kind of view of how things are working and how you work, I guess, really?
Yeah, I've worked with several coaches, or like business coaches, who were trying to guide me in that direction of doing like green content that I can just record, and then it lives there forever. But to me, there's like I created one of those 6-week series, but to me that doesn't replace what you were talking about, which is that personal contact. I don't think there's and that authentic connection. I don't think there's a substitute for that. And yeah, sitting through a 4-week or 6-week recorded program is better than doing nothing. um, but what to me where that falls short of the mark, it's the question and answers, right? The being able to dive deeply into a person's personal process and their life experience and their situations, and looking at all the circumstances of their lives, their history, their conditioning, all that kind of stuff. That's what really makes profound change possible.
Yeah, that's a nice way to say it. So your kind of bio really is, or do you want to kind of give your bio from your perspective? Obviously, I read you as a sort of transformational coach, personal transformational coach, somebody that people can connect with, talk to, and take them on that journey from the place that they're in, probably trauma, fear, anxiety, to a place of happiness and actually, I guess, finding love in themselves. Really, would that be your version?
Yeah, yeah. I don't, I don't often use the word happy because it feels like like to me it misses the mark, and it can mean so many different things, and it's been so overused in advertising and stuff like that. So, but the rest of what you said, like coming to that deep place of self acceptance, um, which leads to self love, and what opens the door to that is self awareness, because we can't do anything about what we can't see. So the first step has to be asking ourselves, why do we do the things we do? Why do we get triggered by certain people and certain situations where somebody else may not be triggered by those things? Maybe they'll be triggered by something else. And also looking at our patterns. Why is it that sometimes we get caught in relationships that feels like the same old movie, only with a different actor, but the same crap, same arguments, same dynamics, uh, same old everything. So at one point we have to get really honest with ourselves and realize that there is one common denominator in every one of those arguments and every one of those relationships, and then ask the hard questions. What's my payoff? Why do I keep attracting situations, relationships that don't really serve me?
Yeah, and I think that comes with age as well, doesn't it? I look back to my journey. I'm kind of 57, so been through relationships, ex-marriage, that kind of thing, and you do find that in your sort of 20s and 30s, you find you're repeating the same things, the same sorts of people. You go through the same challenge, the same experience, and then that finishes, and you meet someone else. It's all wonderful for a time, and then it starts to happen again. And of course, I think in your earlier years, you don't realise that it's you. You always look outbound and think it's everyone else that's a problem, but you kind of realise as you get older that actually you have to change. It's you that's attracting these same people into your life with the same patterns and traits, and therefore, unless you change your way of thinking and the way you react and the way you do things in relationships, then you just get the same thing, repeat, repeat, and of course, it feels like a kind of karmic cycle and test, I guess.
Yeah, exactly, Andy, and boring, right? How many times do we have to repeat the same old crap? Um, and and to be clear, this is not to blame ourselves, right? Even though we are the common denominator in every one of those situations, but it's about becoming more aware of our patterns, our triggers, the types of relationships we get drawn into or that we magnetize toward us, so that we can make a free choice, and a clean choice about our lives and the kind of relationships that we really long to have and deserve to have.
Yeah, that's a good way. I mean, I was just reading through your documentation. So, in terms of sort of reclaiming, I guess, our personal power, from your perspective, what kind of causes people to give their power away in the first place, really? And I guess, how do they take it back fully from your experience?
Yeah, that's the message of my previous book, Awakening the Soul of Power. And there are a couple of reasons we give away our power. Part of it is the conditioning, societal conditioning, that has us believing that power is a bad thing. With quotes such as "power corrupts," and "absolute power corrupts absolutely." But what they didn't tell us about that quote is that Lord Acton, who said those words, was speaking specifically about political power, not the interpersonal power that you and I are referencing. And then the other, like we also tend to think of power as abuse, and no wonder. How many times have we witnessed an abuse of power, whether it's in our personal lives or out in the world at large? And so, what good-hearted person wants to be an abuser of power? So what happens then is that we override our preferences, our desires, our dreams, our will, and we settle for illusions of acceptance. We settle for crumbs of pseudo love because we fear that if we really said what we're feeling and if we really took a stand for ourselves, that other people couldn't handle it. And so we don't want to rock the boat of a relationship too much because we fear that we might end up alone. And so that's what we end up saying yes, when inside it's really a no. Inside it's really not okay with us. Um, but not a good pattern, not a healthy pattern, because um, I mean, eventually those relationships don't work out anyway. Because when we suppress our truth, we end up that turns into resentment. And so not a good strategy by any stretch of the imagination. And the thing to remember is that there are ways that we can get in touch with our power, our innate power, that nobody can give us, nobody can take away, and find a way of expressing it that is a match for us, that it doesn't require that we push anybody down. It doesn't require that we abuse it. It doesn't require that we step on anybody else's neck in order for us to feel powerful. So one of the things that I did in that book is talk about different kinds of power. So there's worldly power or ego power, the way that the world relates to power, which is hierarchical, which is always has an agenda. It's always trying to grab something for itself. It believes that there's a limited amount of power, so that it's threatened by you having power. Whereas the other kind of power, which I refer to as spiritual power or soulful power, um, doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It doesn't believe it's not threatened by other people having power. If I'm in my power, if I know who I am and have clear boundaries and I know what works for me and what doesn't work for me, then why would I be threatened by you having your power? We can negotiate, all the circumstances and all the details of life, each of us from our own place of power.
So do you think that that is one of the core kind of messages, really, in terms of we're all on our own spiritual path, we're all on our own growth path, but trying to actually find acceptance of who we are ourselves is the power, really. And for me, that's the way that I kind of view life now, and think that when I mix with people and meet people, the first thing you notice is, are they confident in themselves and happy who they are, or are they in a kind of space that's not happy with who they are, and they're kind of either egotistical, outbound, or they're very shy and kind of internal, and have sort of internalized their emotional state. And I think most people that we seem to meet and find are in kind of traumatic states, really, from all sorts of things. Generally, lots of things have happened to them in younger life, maybe some sort of abuse that's been in their kind of patterning, really, and they never seem to get out of that very easily. And of course, when you're in that fearful state, that's a level of vibration that's low, and then you kind of attract low vibrating things into your space, low vibrating experiences, people, and of course ultimately people that are going to try and dominate you, really. So again, narcissistic sort of personality tendencies seem to crop up for people that have become subservient to others. Is that also a view that you would hold?
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't have to go very far to see an example of that. Look at Trump, arguably the person who holds the most power in the world at this time. And which is a little mind-boggling from my perspective, how a country could have elected him again. But that's a whole other conversation. But if you scratch under the surface, it's like that man has no sense of self. He is coming from such a deep place of self-hatred and self-denial, and just lack of self-awareness. And he is so thin-skinned that it's really sad. It's pitiful that the slightest tweet from anybody could send him into a whole tailspin of defensiveness, which is what you're talking about, right? Underneath the bully, underneath that defensiveness and that aggressiveness is really somebody who doesn't care very much about themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, what's being projected outbound seems to be power and confidence, and someone that thinks that they're doing the right thing for the right reasons. But like you say, when people like us look at that, you read into it in a completely different way, and you see the opposite, really, of what's being projected. you kind of know that that isn't what's going on behind the scenes, really. It's almost like the duck, isn't it, with the legs under the surface that are kind of, moving really quickly. On the top, it appears to be one thing, but under the water, it's something completely different. Definitely. So I was going to say, in terms of
and that's
sorry.
No, go ahead, Andy.
No, go ahead, Christian. You're about to speak.
No, I was going to say that absolutely that's the beauty of doing the kind of work that you and I are talking about, and that we support people through, which is looking underneath the surface and asking those deeper existential questions. Who are we really? What are we doing here? What do we want from life in this very short life that we have? And what makes us do the things we do? What are the underlying, for the most part, unconscious drivers? And what's really tragic, that a lot of the stuff that we do is because of stuff that we haven't even questioned, because that's the way our parents did, or their parents before them, or because of we misheard something, right? Some misunderstanding from childhood that somebody's said to us in a moment of overwhelm, or reacted, and we took it on as truth. So then we're overcompensating for things that are deep down inside of us, that we're not, beliefs that aren't even true, that we're not good enough, that there's something wrong with us. But then we have spent our entire life overcompensating and trying to prove that we are good enough and that we are worth it, when our worth is inherent. It doesn't require proving.
And do you think that's kind of the overriding theme for most of the clients that you see? Obviously, when you're seeing people every day, you get to the point when you've worked with enough people, you start to have these kind of profiles, don't you? When you think this person fits into this profile, that person fits into a different profile. But when you've worked with people for a long time, you obviously get to know where the problems have come in. And as you say, most of it, I guess, probably stems from childhood things that have happened. And those things then carry forward into kind of adult life. I think one of the things that I would find interesting quite often is, you think, when you're a child, you look up to adults and you assume that they know what's right for you, the best way to do things, and you kind of have these people that you put on this precipice. And then when you become an adult, you realise that it's not that easy, and the people that you've been working alongside, or the people that you've put on the precipice, have got their own problems. They haven't worked through a lot of their inner work, self-work. They've got their own anxieties, issues, problems, and things that they've carried through from their childhood. And you kind of start to realise that the whole picture is very different to the way that I think society kind of broadcasts it to most people, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and part of it is, when we're that young, when we're kids, we are totally dependent. So we really do pedestalize, which I know that's a made up word, but we put our parents and our caretakers up on a pedestal. And we don't, for the most part, we don't question what they tell us until we reach a certain age. But you're right. Then the eyes open, and we realize that they're just as human and struggling with their own crap, just as we are. And what's interesting too is that science has proven that trauma is actually passed on epigenetically. So they did a study with grandchildren of victims of the Holocaust. And they found in those grandchildren, who obviously hadn't experienced that unspeakable situation, but they had some of the same habits, some of the same behaviors that had been passed on. So that's the bad news. The good news is that healing is also passed on epigenetically. And if we're going to go about what physicists tell us, that time is an illusion, just like space is, then that means that when we heal ourselves, not only are we healing generations that are coming forward, but we're also healing in that direction, healing towards the past. And that's very hope inspiring.
And that's that kind of quantum effect, isn't it? That what we're focusing on, what we're doing, which we can change both ways forward. And I think when people understand that, especially healers and people like yourself that are working with people that have been through traumas, if you can kind of fix or bring them to a point that they feel they've resolved the problems today, you can move that forwards and backwards along those timelines. And that is huge, I think, really. And this is this whole kind of quantum effect of, when you think about something, you bring it in, or you manifest it, bring it into that kind of realization. And the more things we think about and the more ways we do that, then we're changing it for everybody as well. So if I'm healing myself, I'm also healing you effectively. And if you're healing yourself, kind of healing me. So the more of us that understand this is what we need to do, I think that kind of envelops outwards, kind of across the planet, and encompasses everyone really.
Absolutely, Andy. And to me, now we're getting into ultimate truth, the fact that we're all interconnected. Um, and I don't know that our science is developed yet to the point that we can prove how interconnected everything is. But I'm reminded of that documentary I Am, um, which was produced by Tom Shadyac, who produced all the Jim Carrey movies. But this is a documentary about his life. And so basically had a bad bicycle accident and had a bad concussion from which he almost didn't come back, but he did. And so then he came back with a renewed and expanded sense of purpose. So he got a camera crew and went all over the world asking spiritual teachers, spiritual leaders, what's wrong with the world and what can we do about it? And the scene that came to mind from that you're talking from your words, at some point they have them in Northern California. There's a place called the HeartMath Institute where they're actually studying the biofield. It's not the aura, but the scientifically measurable energy field that comes out of the heart, which turns out is like, I forget, it's like 100 times more powerful than the energy field emitted by the brain, which makes us think, who really is the boss of us? Because we tend to think of this as our boss, but maybe not. And it turns out that the heart has prescience, so that it knows things before they happen. So they have them sitting in front of a computer with random images of a baby and a beautiful sunrise and a rose and then a dismembered corpse or a snake with the venom dripping out of the fangs. The heart, like he's measuring, which is connected to EKG, the heart has a response before the eyes actually see the image. So how does that happen? But anyway, they have him sitting in front of a table and they have a bowl of yogurt in front of him with this electrodes that are measuring the yogurt. There's no physical connection between him and the yogurt. And then they'll ask him questions like, how's your marriage going? Knowing perfectly well that he just got divorced. And the yogurt has an emotional response. They'll ask him, have you met with your attorney lately? The yogurt has an emotional response. So if we're connected to the bacteria in a bowl of yogurt, how can we not be connected to each other?
Yeah, that's really. I've not heard of that actually, but that is really interesting. I'm going to make a note of that to research that a bit later. Because again, obviously I work spiritually with my spirit guide Chen, so he channels through me and we do talks and sort of worldwide meditations, and that's kind of where he's coming from, that if we can bring people together at the same time in a worldwide meditation and then work through healing ourselves, clearing our field, bringing us back to a sovereign space as a kind of person, and then connecting kind of generically together across the world, and then kind of bringing that vibration up and changing the frequency, then we change the frequency of everyone in the spaces that we live, because it's all connected. And when you start to understand the concept, you think, well, we should be doing kind of worldwide meditations every day with everyone on the planet effectively to bring the vibration up, which would push the darker negative interference away and bring that conscious awareness into everyone's field as well, really. So that whole field and the concepts of is really interesting. And Chen was telling me quite some years ago, as you just said about the heart, really, that when we say certain words to each other, if we say negative words, the heart chakra closes, and if we say loving, positive things, the heart chakra opens. It's the same type of concept that we've got this energy opening and closing. And of course, if we're in a traumatic relationship and we're arguing all the time and it's very negative, the heart chakra closes and doesn't open. And obviously people go for years then living in these traumatic negative relationships or marriages where they're bickering and fighting, and both heart chakras are closed, and of course there is going to be no positive energy moving through, and then people will probably manifest some sort of disease because the energetics aren't right, of course, as well. And when we sort of understand that concept, it makes complete sense, really.
Yeah, of course. And it reminds me of the work of Dr. Emoto, the Japanese guy who studied water, the effects of the words that we use on water. And it's amazing, right? He would have like different jars of water with just a label on it, like love or hate. And then after like few days, they would take a microscopic view of the water, and it was amazing to see the difference just from having that word, not even said out loud, just like taped on it. And we know that we're like, I don't know, 90 something percent water. So of course the words that we not only hear, but the words that we tell ourselves in our heads, of course, are having an effect on us.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it, actually? Because when you sort of start to frame that concept with the kind of the biofield, the way the heart's working, connecting to everyone else, most of society is living outside the way that we're designed to live, really, because it's person against person, competition, negativity. There's a lot of contention in corporations, jobs, and people, sort of vying or fighting for things against other people. So if you look at society, the whole thing kind of is wrong, really, to embrace, as we came back to, like a loving, happy life. So it's no wonder that no one can live a particularly powerful, loving life and relationship, because we're living in these societies that have been programmed in the wrong way, really, is the way that I kind of interpret that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think hopefully we're at the end of that. I think, to me, we're living in the times that it's the end of the patriarchy, which is about this, dog eat dog competition, um, hierarchical relationship, not only with each other, but relationship to the planet, right? It's this wham, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am relationship to the earth, which is not sustainable. Like, we're beginning to just witness now whatever it is that we have unleashed on the environment. So, time to fasten our seatbelts. Whereas the type of relationships and connection that we're moving into is more, I don't think we need to go back to the time of the of the matriarchal cultures, but we do need to reclaim the sacred feminine, which has, goddess was exiled for a few thousand years. And for the last few thousand years, it's been such a male dominant world, uh, and the feminine was turned into something weakness. And so many things wrong with that, so many faulty assumptions with that. First of all, that the feminine is weakness. It's like, wait a minute, you want to talk power, resilience, courage? Let's talk about the power of creation that resides in a female body. And then the other problem with that is that we have labeled the emotions weakness, and the conditioning starts at a young age. Little boys don't cry. It's like, wait a minute, what's up with that? How come little boys don't cry? And it's because we have turned the emotions into something that's only feminine, and that it's weakness. But there's such a price to pay for that, because the emotions, they're not strength, they're not weakness, they're not good, they're not bad, they're just energy, like everything else in creation. And we get into trouble. Think of a 2-year-old having a total tantrum, a meltdown. 2 minutes later, they're playing like if nothing happened. They have their emotions fully, so then they can move on to the next emotion. We get into trouble with the emotions because we stuff them and we stuff them. And then what happens when we do that? We stuff them and we stuff them. And then the next poor, unfortunate soul says something to us the wrong way, and boom, volcanic eruption, and we cause harm to our relationships. Or what you were pointing to, we stuff them and we stuff them and we stuff them. Those energies have to start coming out one way or another, and they start seeping out and turning into physical symptoms: cancer, heart attacks, ulcers. So we've got to get straight, so to speak, about all these things.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to explain it. I mean, I have that upbringing as well. The whole boys don't cry thing. If I fell off my bike, my dad would pick the bike up and check it was okay before me. Oh, it's okay, the bike's all right. I think I've got a big hole in my leg, but as long as the bike's okay, that's kind of fine, really. But that was that kind of male-dominated sort of upbringing, really. And as you say, I think the whole kind of control of the feminine has been done purposely, really, because we look in
Yeah.
the spiritual arena, it's very female dominated. There aren't that many men in the spiritual space talking about these sorts of things, because they're all watching football generally, or doing something different. And in our kind of circles, again, the men are kind of very distracted with computer games and things that don't really make any difference. And it seems to be that the females that are the ones online that are here to work, to change the planet's vibration, try and do things in that way. And certainly our client base is probably 80% feminine compared to male, really, which kind of tells you everything, because it's the males that have got the problem generally, more than the women. So it's everything's in reverse at the moment, I think. And like you say, it feels like it's a kind of time of change. That we run meditation courses and groups, and one of the things we talk about often at the end of those groups when we're teaching personal sovereignty and spiritual sovereignty and cleansing your field and clearing negative interference is to start changing your family afterwards. So once these people understand the concepts and the techniques and do meditation, that kind of stuff, then start to get your, the other people, the other significant person in your life, to start to think about and do the same things. And then we can start to get this kind of ball rolling and bring men back online. Because I think men have been kind of given this distraction over here purposely, because if they were to actually, embrace and work with, their other significant partners, wives or whoever, everything changes. But keeping this division is where obviously everything's been for, the last couple of 100 years, I guess, really.
Yeah, thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. In my case, in my own retreats and workshops and breathwork classes, it's probably 70% at least women for the majority. And it's interesting. I don't know the numbers for for the UK, but I know that in the US, more than half of college graduates are now women. So we can see which trend this is going. And in more than, I think it's 40%, when I was researching for the book, in more than 40% of heterosexual households, the woman is out earning the man. So she's bringing in more money than the man. So it helps to understand why so many men are having a crisis, right? Because part of our identity as men has been to be the provider. And so now as shifts are happening and women are stepping into their own power, thankfully, and now I think it is time to start focusing on the men, because right now, in terms of the awakening, I think heterosexual men are the rear guard. And there's a price to pay for that. Like if you look in the US, again, I don't know the numbers in the UK, but 3/4 of suicides are committed by middle-aged white men, which still have the majority of the power in the world. And you would think, right, the group that has the majority of the rights and the majority of the benefits, that they would be doing better than anybody else. But no, they're not happy. And they're not fulfilled, and they're questioning themselves, and they're taking their lives at 3/4, 75%. There's something wrong with that. So I totally agree. We need to look at that and do something about it.
Really. Yeah, and you're right, actually. I'm not sure the numbers in the UK, but we know lots of people in their kind of late 20s to sort of early 30s that are committing suicide, just in the groups of people that we mix with. And it seems to be an epidemic, really. And like no one seems to have the answer. Why do these people feel unheard? They're obviously isolated from their friends and their families. They can't talk to people. Is that because as a society we don't have the right people to talk to, or the mechanisms aren't in the right places? Because in theory, it is that whole thing, isn't it? When you're having these sorts of challenging thoughts, or you find yourself in difficult positions, maybe like you said, your wife's earning more money, so you feel you're kind of undermined to a certain degree. That should be okay. It should be fine, because it's always been fine the other way around. If men earn more money than their wives, that's kind of expected, and it's okay. And I know a few people that the wives go to work, and the guys are the kind of house husbands, really, and they're kind of happy with that. They actually like the fact that they take the children to school and they talk to all the other mums, and they kind of do the upbringing side of it, because their wives.
Some guys have adapted really well to them.
Yeah.
And I think what, Andy, I think it goes back to what we started to talk about, which is self-esteem and self-love and self-worth. If that's in place, then everything else comes from that. And if there's for guys who might be struggling with that, yeah, maybe you're not bringing in the bacon like you used to, But there are other ways that we can fulfill these archetypal masculine roles. So there's other things that we can provide other than just this, rather than being stuck and focused on the size of the paycheck. There's other things that we can provide. How about providing a stable environment? How about being a rock at your home, so that your spouse, your children can all blossom and have that sense of safety, and foundation that is priceless. Um, so I think we're just in really interesting times, and all these roles are being reevaluated and rechosen. And like I said, we don't want to go back to matriarchal system. What we want is balance, but a balance between the masculine and the feminine energies that course through all of us, because in the entire cosmos they're equally balanced. It's only in, at least as far as I know, in this little pebble of a planet that we have turned the feminine into something less than.
Yeah, it's a control system, isn't it? The male control system has
Mm.
overridden the feminine purposely because, again, my spirit guide used to say to me, Chen used to say, women would never send their kids to war. No woman is going to birth children and go through that
That's
whole
right.
process and then send them to war to be, to be killed effectively. So only a man would do that because they don't. It's not their children, or they haven't brought them up. They don't have the sort of feminine maternal connection. And when you think that way, you think if you change politicians around so that the female dominated politics, then we wouldn't probably have wars because they wouldn't do that. It's only
Oh,
guys that have this masculine thing that would send their children, and of course,
guaranteed.
yeah,
Guaranteed. When women are in 50% of power in the world, and we're not even remotely close to that, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and social justice and education, to all of it, to how we treat the environment, to all of it.
yeah, it's a big step change, isn't it? So, in terms of your kind of conscious relationships, how much of what people experience in relationships really do you think is kind of unconscious patterns versus sort of deeper something deeper influencing their behaviours?
I think, unfortunately, Andy, that most of us, at least the way we have done them, and the majority of the way that the majority of people do them now, it's unconscious. And starting with the most basic way that we approach a relationship, and going back to, it all connects also to self-esteem and self-worth, because we're lacking it deep inside, and because that is such a difficult thing to accept, that the lack of self-acceptance and self-love, so we suppress that. And then we go outside of ourselves looking for validation. If I could only have that relationship, or that car, or that house, or have that much in my bank account, then I would feel worth it. But we know that there's no amount of externals that would ever be enough to fulfill us. And the most tragic part of that is that our worth, like I was saying earlier, is inherent and requires no proving. So rather than looking outside of ourselves for more, or fill in the blank, to try to feel good about ourselves, it is so much more wise to look inside and to look at the obstacles. And where did this go wrong? Where did I pick up that belief that there was something wrong with me? And what do I need to do, to heal that and to clear that? And like you were saying, there's so many modalities that we can be drawn to, whether it's therapy or coaching or breath work, so many things that we can do, meditation, to help us clear that stuff. And but it takes courage, and it takes looking within. That's one of those few things that I don't see a way around. If you want to be free, if you want to have a sense of power, of personal power, if you want to have a life that has meaning and purpose and relationships that can work, then you've got to go within and ask the hard questions.
Is that what would be your so when you meet a kind of new client, Christian? What's your kind of path? Is it subjective to that person's problems, their traumas, issues, fears, or do you have a a staircase effectively of methods that you employ, starting off with obviously a kind of deep dive discussion to work out what you need to do, I guess, and how you do that?
My approach is twofold. The coaching part of it, which is more cognitive, is understanding, the person, and learning about their history and the pattern of relationships, and what was the relationship with their parents like. Because, like a friend of mine says, um, we have to heal our relationship with our parents so that we can stop dating them. right? So we're recreating subconsciously our relationship with our parents. So what we want to do here is bring that stuff from the unconscious into the conscious. So that's one part of my methodology. The other part that I use in all my retreats and all my workshops is breath work, because I've yet to come across anything that heals as profoundly and in so many levels. And we should specify that breath work is a very broad term, and there's a lot of different breathing practices and techniques. Anybody who has ever done yoga has done breath work, right? There are different pranayama practices. What I'm talking about is kind of breath work on steroids. You breathe in a certain way, in a circular, connected way for about an hour and a half, and amazing stuff happens. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I come out of that psychotherapy tradition. After doing this kind of breath work that I'm talking about once, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it heals so quickly and so profoundly and in so many levels. So I knew when I came out of that session, I knew I had to do it again. And I knew that I had to make it available for others. And that was probably going on 35 years ago.
So when you say breath work, so for people that don't really understand what that means, so you're talking about obviously breathing in, holding, so like clearing the field. Is that how you would interpret it, or what's your kind of version?
No, like I say, that's one of the methodologies of meditative breathing. Like I said, there's so many different types. The one that I'm talking about is the circular breath. So there's no pause between the inhale and your exhale, and all the effort goes into the inhale. And so the technique is pretty simple. Like I wouldn't recommend anybody just do that on their own because it's really powerful and very cathartic. So I would recommend, the first few sessions, you do it in the presence of a trained facilitator. I've had people recover suppressed memories of sexual abuse, and like, people go into suicidal panic. Like that's one of the reasons I don't do it online, because it's powerful stuff can come up. And I think that part of the reason for that is that it's the container that I hold that allows for those deep traumas to come up. I know other people that are doing breath work online that it's more like has more of a relaxing meditative state, which is great. Living in the stressful world that we live in. For the deeper work that I offer, I would recommend doing it in the presence of somebody who's trained, who can hold the container and hold the space for you. And so that the mind can feel safe enough to relax of the stuff that it has tried to sweep under the rug, and allow it to come up for healing and clearing. Because we know that sweeping it under the rug is not a good strategy. It's only going to fester under the surface, and it's going to get worse. And eventually you're going to have to pay the pipe. So do the work, but do it wisely, right? Find somebody who is credible for you. Trust your intuition, your feeling in approaching a healer, somebody who's is going to have the integrity, the respect, the honor, to that so that you can feel safe, and be able to let go of the stuff that we need to let go of.
I think that's a great way to explain it. So, in terms of how do you think someone can trust that inner guidance, really, and how do they know the difference between what we would call intuition and something that isn't really aligned with them? How would you kind of explain that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's not easy, right? So, what's that voice inside of our heads? Who's speaking? Here's some of the things that I've come up with. The voice of intuition is usually quiet and subtle and simple, right? It'll say things like yes or nope, I wouldn't go there, do that. And whereas the voice of the ego mind, I kid around that the ego mind went to law school. So it's always building a case as to prove why it's right. It's always pulling from here, pulling from there, using big words, large concepts, complicated concepts. If we find ourselves doing that, safe bet that we're coming from the ego, which is the predominant voice in our heads, right? That's what most of us are, egos that don't even know what the ego mind is. And, we don't have time to get into it here, but here's a great, beautiful metaphor. If you put a football in the center of a stadium, That's what the ego is. Um, who we are is actually the stadium. When we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of us to think that it is all of us and to make really important, consequential choices about our lives, about our relationships from its small, tiny, and always fear-based perspective. So, however the viewer is guided to do it, do some research, figure out what the ego is so that you understand it. And in the book that we referenced before, the Power book, I spent probably the first fifth of the book detailing what and helping and have some beautiful images that help to understand the ego mind. Because again, if we want to be free, if we want to be in power, if we want to have relationships that have a chance of working, we have to understand that part of ourselves.
Yeah, it's a great way to frame it. I think this is the whole thing, isn't it? When we meet people, I'd probably do the same as you. Not that you kind of psychoanalyze people, but you notice if the ego's talking, because those people are the ones that need attention and crave attention, and they want to be the centre of everything. And you kind of know that in that mind there is this, this thing that's demanding attention, the loudest voice, taking control of the room. It's always the same sorts of people doing the same things. And most of them come across as kind of like trauma-based people that haven't cleared their energy, haven't cleared their field, haven't worked on themselves. And I guess really, lots of people go through these intense challenges during the spiritual awakening cycles. So do you kind of see struggle as a necessary component for that growth? And really, how would people navigate those periods without kind of losing themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I get into that, which is a beautiful question, I want to expand how we're talking about ego, because most of us think that ego means arrogance, inflated sense of self, and it is that for sure, but it is a lot more than that. It's a much more complicated understanding of what that is. And in terms of what you were just pointing to is like, yeah, growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. Sorry to say, but it just doesn't. And comfort is overrated, and comfort can easily become stagnation. So in order for us to grow, we have to like take a step, even if it's a baby step, outside of that comfort zone, which means putting ourselves in some degree of risk. And of course, I'm not talking about putting your life at risk. I'm talking about psychological, emotional risk. And it could be a very simple thing. It could be saying yes and going on a coffee date. Or it could be saying yes and transcending the fear of the ego. All fear comes from the ego. And putting in an application for a job that we have ambivalent feelings that maybe we don't feel like we're good enough for. Override that, apply for it. You can always make a choice down the road to see whether it's a good match or not for you. But don't give your power of choice to the fear of that tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are.
Yeah, it kind of overlays with change, doesn't it? Lots of people, are fearful of change. Whereas I think change is good. Change makes life interesting. Really, if we stay in the same loop, doing the same things every day, that becomes, as you said, stagnant and probably a bit boring, really. But if there is change and continual change, that makes life interesting. And sometimes change is good and we enjoy the change, and sometimes not so good. But that is kind of the path. That is part of our awareness. And I think that's where growth comes from, ultimately, really.
Absolutely. And you again pointing us back to the ego. The ego, to the ego, anything that's challenging the status quo is scary. And it doesn't care whether the status quo is at best comfortable, at worst miserable. It doesn't care. Anything that signifies the possibility of change, it's going to be threatened by. Its job is to maintain things exactly the way they are now. So once we understand that, right, and once we understand that that's not really us, that's just our ego that is afraid of change, then we can navigate it and we can reassure the ego and say, hey, I've got this. Yeah, I know that you're threatened by me going for this job interview or this coffee date, but I've got this. And I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway and relax. We've got this.
It's a lovely way to say it, actually, Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So, if someone feels stuck, sort of overwhelmed, disconnected, those sorts of things, what would you suggest to be the kind of next step, really, that they can take to kind of reconnect to their power? Because obviously, your books are around power, which is why I was drawn to the concept that you're talking about and the way that you teach too.
Well, let's do just reconnect to themselves first, because that circles back to where we started, that self-worth and self-love. Um, and if we're disconnected with ourselves, there's no way we can get to that place of deep self-love. Um, so two ways to approach it. First, understanding that it's just illusion, right? That's the ego, the one that feels alone and separate and abandoned. um, Ken Wilber, who talks about these things, the evolution of the ego in human history, talks about how we always haven't had an ego. Like at one point, we were like the rest of the animal kingdom, feeling completely at one with. As far as we know, we're the only species that has a sense of self. That's what ego is, right? The word ego means I in Latin. So it's a sense of separate individual personality. This is Christian, that's Andy. Ultimately, illusion, and both the helpful illusion and the source of all our suffering. Um, so there's some theories about the elephants and the higher primates and the dolphins and the whales that they have a sense of who they are. Like, they'll do studies where they put a dog or a cat in front of a mirror, and we've probably seen the YouTube videos. They interact with the image as if it was another dog or a cat. If you put a higher primate, like a gorilla, a chimp, in front of a mirror, and you put ash on their shoulder, at some point they'll go like this. They'll rub it off. It dawns on them that that's them in the image. But to jump from that to having a sense of self, we can't really do that. We're not inside of their heads. So understanding that sense of separation, loneliness, it's all illusion. It's not real, right? So that's first step, one aspect of it. The other aspect is get off the freaking couch, right? You go do something. Go sit in a coffee house. Force yourself to say hello to the person sitting next to you on the bus. Uh, right? That's what we mean by getting outside of our comfort zone. And it doesn't have to be this huge step, it starts baby steps. And it's interesting that you were talking about too, how in one way, technology and the internet has us all more interconnected than ever before. Yet at the same time, we feel lonelier because now we feel isolated, and have virtual relationships. So do something about that, right? Just get off the screen and go meet and connect with a real human being, in the flesh.
Yeah, well, I think where we are in society with the tech AI going down one route, I think that is the kind of the crossroads we've kind of come to, really, that people will only find happiness with other people. We won't find it with tech and games and football and all of the things that separate and divide. It has to be people contact, people in the room together, talking together. And as you say, it's really weird because now we can do this. We can connect across the world and we can have a chat and do things that we couldn't do 20 years ago, which is fantastic. But I think so many people are in this place of hurt and trauma because they've lost who they are. And that kind of is why your book, I think, is so interesting. So do you just want to talk about your latest book, the I think is it Conscious Love?
Conscious love, yeah.
Yeah.
Transforming our relationship to relationships. So transforming the way that we even approach relationships. So part of what I did in that book is identify 10 different challenges, 10 different obstacles that get in the way of having relationships that have a chance of working. Whether you call them conscious relationships or intentional, whatever you want to call them, right? So the first one we already spoke about, which is we're approaching the relationship hoping that it's going to give us a sense of meaning and purpose, that it's going to make us happy. Forget it. There isn't anybody out there who's going to make us happy, and it's not their job to. Like, how unfair to put that responsibility on someone else. You are going to make me happy. Like, yikes, that's a big, tall order. So there's a couple of ways that we can approach relationships. We can approach them consciously, meaning that we know that we are the only ones that are responsible for our own happiness, or unconsciously, which is what we were just talking about. And then Ram Dass, the spiritual teacher, talks about how if we're going to do the relationships consciously, there's 3 levels of them. One of them is we're on this path of self-discovery and spiritual growth. The people that you and I work with, right, that are wanting to do looking for meaning and purpose and figuring out who we are and what this is all about, and what we can do with these precious lives of ours. But maybe our partner is not interested in doing that. But enough works, right? Maybe we live, cohabitate well together, we travel well together, we have great conversations, we have fun, sex is great, maybe we co-parent well together, etc. Right? Enough of it works that we can say, okay, well, they don't want to play at the same level that I want to play at, but maybe I can find some friends in my life that I can do that with, and some colleagues. And so I stay in the relationship consciously, and I will reclaim the time, the effort, the resources that I would otherwise be spending looking for the one. Then I can reclaim that and focus on my own personal growth and transformation. We'll skip 2 and get back to it. Level 3, both beings are fully realized, fully aware of our God nature, our sacred presence, whatever you want to call it. And so then that relationship becomes a sacred dance where we just mirror that for each other. I don't think we need to worry about that one yet. At least most of us don't. I don't think anybody, I don't know anybody who is of the level 3 relationship. So then let's focus on 2. 2 is the juicy one. That's where both partners are in on it. And we use the container of the relationship, right? The form of the relationship to speed up our own process of growth and transformation. Because the reality is that we all have blind spots, which we're never going to see in ourselves. But boy, can we see it in the other. So if we approach a relationship consciously, means that we understand what projection is, right? That we judge and we make wrong something over there that is also here. And so if whatever they do, and it doesn't even have to be just romantic relationships, it could be family members, it could be coworkers, whatever they do, the more that it gets our goat, the more that it triggers us, the clearer the sign that we're also doing that in some way. And the details can be different. So let me give you an example from my life. A few years ago, I was dating somebody, and I knew it wasn't relationship, like deep relationship material, but I had just come out of a 7-year relationship. They were also weren't interested in that deep kind of a conscious relationship. It was just basically sex was great. So suddenly disappeared, like didn't show up a couple of times for our meetings. No communication, no email, no text, no phone call, nothing. I didn't get it, right? I was focused like, oh, what's going on with them? They're called work, were they working there? It's like they weren't working there. So is it fired? Is it drugs? What? So I didn't get it. So I had to subconsciously, because we don't get up in the morning and set out to do this, subconsciously create another situation in my life so that I would get the lesson. So I was flying to New York, and I was trying to schedule a meeting with a literary agent that I was working with then, who was great about communication. Like she get back to me within hours, if not at most 24. A week goes by and I hadn't heard from him. Now that got my attention, right? 2 people, unrelated, different walks of life, kind of doing the same thing. But because these are blind spots, my first job was like, let me get clear. Like, right? What are they doing? Right? They're not showing up, literally. They're not doing what they said they would do. They're not keeping their word. They're not keeping their agreements. So they're out of integrity, right? Clear to see. In the other, hard to see, right? Hard to turn that mirror around, that mirror that we shove in their face, turn it around and ask ourselves, how am I doing that? And it took me a few days to see it. So I started that, and of course, I was going through my life and working and doing other stuff. So I wasn't doing just that. But I was going, if I went for a walk or driving, it's like, right, where am I doing that in my life? And I would do like an inventory of relationships. No, I'm showing up. No, I'm keeping my word. No, I'm in integrity. I'm keeping my agreements. And then it hit me, Andy, in relationship to my own writing. Like, how many times had I said to myself, nobody else was in on this. I'm going to finish that chapter by such and such a date. Did I do it? No. The deadline came and went. I was doing other stuff. I was doing retreats, workshop, traveling, whatever. But I wasn't showing up literally for my writing. So I wasn't showing up in this particular area of my life. Same thing, just different circumstances, different details. It's like I busted. Wow. Busted myself. I'm doing exactly the same thing, just with different details. But here's the beauty of how this stuff works when we do life consciously. Within an hour of me having that insight, they both called. So no longer that I need to create drama in my life to realize that, hey, dude, make a choice. Either show up for your reading and do what you said you were going to do, or choose otherwise, right? There's no law that says I have to finish a book or that I even have to write a book, but bring it to consciousness, right? If you're going to do it, then keep your word, or at least renegotiate the deadline with yourself. And as long as we're doing that, we stop creating drama in our lives.
Yeah, that's a really good way to explain it, actually, because I think it's this whole manifestation conversation as well, isn't it? That people talk about kind of manifestation boards and where you actually sit consciously and build yourself, the life that you really want in the way you want it, with the right people, right partners, the right things that you enjoy. But if you don't focus on those things, you're not ever going to bring them to you, because you need to attract that energy into your space, don't you, really? And is that what that book was for you then, a Christian, really? Was a kind of relationship to relationship bridge, really?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time, right? For 35 years. So I'm not saying that I'm done. I don't think we're ever done. And how boring would it be if we were? Um, but it's over the last, 30 something years that I've been doing coaching and retreats and workshops, I realized that that is the single area where most of us struggle. And people who are otherwise incredibly successful, um, like this person comes to mind who is like a global vice president of a global multinational corporation, incredibly successful, brilliant. Even people who are spiritually based and yet in their own personal intimate relationships, they wreak havoc. They have no clue. So that's what inspired that book. It's like, so helping us approach relationships in a different way, and then understanding what gets in the way of that. Like another one is our definition of love, right? We confuse the feeling of love, the emotional aspect of, with the act and art of loving, which is a very different thing, right? Love doesn't always feel good, so we can't go by the feeling. So, like, think of disciplining a child, right? Who's about to run into a busy street, or they're having too much sugar. Like, saying no and disciplining, putting limits on it, doesn't feel good for us, but it's an act of love for them. So love doesn't always feel good, right? So Scott Peck, who wrote beautifully about this, defines love as a spiritual act when we move beyond our comfort, beyond our preferences, for the sake of the spiritual growth of another.
Yeah, that's a really good way to define it, I think. Because again, we all talk about the word love, but it doesn't mean the same to two different people. Everyone has a different upbringing, and society overlays different words with different things. And love is probably one of the most overused words in the wrong way, I guess, for most people in society. And obviously, the way you're bringing that together with your work is kind of crucial, I think. So, do you want to just give us how people can connect to you, what your preferred method of connection is, your website, those sorts of details?
Yeah, probably the website is the best way to reach me, and from there they can get my email or my social media. My website is soulfulpower.com. SOULFUL power POWER.com. And thank you for asking that, Andy, and thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for having the show. I
Yeah,
know with
perfect.
the depth of conversations you're having, a lot of lives are being impacted. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Christian. I think it's one of those things that we're all here trying to do our the part that we need to play. As you said at the start, really, this is a play effectively, and we kind of realise that we're on the stage and the curtains have gone back, and we're all playing our part. But I think trying to bring together different people, we're in a spiritual space. You come from a spiritual space too, but trying to bring things together and talk about things in a different way, so that I have my way of doing things, you have your way, and there's so many other modalities and different people. And I think when we do these podcasts and different people connect and talk, you'll say something that will turn someone else on, change their life, that I wouldn't have got to, and then I might say something slightly for someone different. So again, the more of us, the more ways we can talk about things, and ultimately, we're kind of, the way I see the world is this, is this divided, separated place, and we need to pull together and bring our species back to somewhere that's more conscious, and we actually treat each other with respect and love, and we forget about colour and culture and all the other stuff, and just get back to, we're all people trying to have this human experience, and it could be really cool if we kind of pull together, really. So So let's kind of do that. So thanks for joining. Thanks for being on. As I say, when we finish, I'll upload the details, send you some links when we put it out on YouTube and the podcast platforms, and then you can share to your audience. And obviously, I'll make sure that your website and other details are on there from that perspective too. So you have a good. Well, was it your afternoon now? I guess, is it?
It is it's almost 2 p.m.
Yeah. Yes. So you have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much again. Great connecting with you, Andy.
Okay, you take care. Thanks, Christian.
All right, take care. Blessings.
Cheers. Bye bye.